Welcome back to the Raising Our Vibration podcast, where we explore higher consciousness through spiritual practice. And today, Stephen and I are going to discuss 3 neuroscience assumptions that block your liberation. So this came up, or this topic came up, as I was reading a neuroscience article this week from the Washington University School of Medicine entitled "Scientists Find Mind-Body Connection is Built into Brain." Okay, so as I was an interesting study, and of course it showed that there was a structure in the brain where there was connections between the thought process, thinking and planning, what they were calling mind, and body processes. So that they said that explains why when you do slow, deep breathing, it affects your mind and emotions and other things like that. So on the surface, you know, that it's good research and supports what we do with mind-body training and meditation. It certainly does. But underneath it, there's some assumptions that Stephen and I both find in our teaching really block people. These are assumptions of neuroscience and science in general that we as a culture hold these assumptions and just assume them and don't realize we're assuming them. And they block us from going into deeper states of meditation and experiencing liberation of consciousness. So what are these 3 assumptions? So the first is associating consciousness with the mind and the body. So in neuroscience and in consciousness studies, there's a camp that sees all of experiences happening either in the mind or in the body or in some interaction between the mind and the body. And so what's the issue with that? The issue with that is that what we're assuming but not taking into account is consciousness itself, because we are the body, our perception of the body and our sensory perception arises within consciousness, as well as our thoughts and our plans and our mental constructs. They all arise within consciousness. Consciousness is so ubiquitous that we don't recognize it and we totally disregard it. And so we don't realize, and this can be very simply verified in our own experience by just focusing into the body and say focusing into your hand, feeling your hand, and being aware of your hand. So you are not the body, the hand, any part of the body that you can be aware of. You are that which is aware of the body. Same with our thoughts, same with our emotions. Consciousness is that within which this experience of mind and body and emotion arises. These experiences are constructions within consciousness itself. So that's the first point. So the mind and body aren't fundamental or primary. They arise within a more fundamental primary consciousness. The second assumption, and this is a kind of a materialist bias, is to see consciousness as a result of brain activity. But 3 very interesting experiences very quickly debunk that idea, because if consciousness is brain activity, then you would think that more richer experiences or more profound experiences would be associated with higher levels of brain activity. But interestingly, and we know this in meditation, as we become quieter and brain activity dampens and dampens and dampens, the mind becomes quiet, there's actually a very rich experience of awareness. So that if you're measuring on an EEG and you'll show a dampening of neural activity, and you'll notice alpha and theta waves, which are quieting of brain centers. You actually have a very rich experience of bliss and oneness and the most profound experiences you can imagine, but they're associated with a lowering of brain activity. The same thing is found in psychedelic research, where they've found that what the psychedelics do is they actually dampen brain activity, and that opens up this rich and profound experience. Same with NDEs, near-death experiences. That's like a flat line of brain activity, and yet there's a very rich and scientifically verified rich experience across thousands and thousands of studies done with near-death experiences. And again, it's the lowering or even the cessation of brain activity that leads to this rich and profound and life-changing experience. So that points to the fact that brain activity is really an epiphenomenon of consciousness, and versus the other way around. And then finally, the third assumption in neuroscience that tends to carry over into our culture and the way that we operate in this culture is that we're stuck in our heads. So neuroscience is all about studying the brain and disregards that the brain is within a complex system that includes the cardiac nervous system, which is like a second brain, and the enteric nervous system, which is like a third brain, and that all of that is connected through the vagus nerve network, which is like an integrating network that coordinates the activity of that whole nervous system. And that's really where we want to go today, is to talk about these three brains that we have and their connectedness, and how activating awareness in the enteric nervous system, called the lower dantian, the cardiac nervous system, the middle dantian, and the brainstem and the upper dantian, through the vagus nerve and through these practices that we do, opens us to a whole new way of viewing ourselves, viewing our connectedness with all of life, and feeling this flow of vital energy that is a bridge into expanded consciousness and recognition of ourselves as awareness itself. So I thought I'd read just a little bit from Stephen in my book, Raising Our Vibration, that talks about, in chapter 1, which is on states of consciousness, we talk about these three brains that we have and how they relate to the subtle energy system. So the three dantians, so lower, middle, and upper dantian, correspond to the three brains of the human body. Current scientific research shows that in addition to the brain in your head, you have a vast neural network that operates like a brain in your gut and also in your heart. In fact, the brains in your gut and heart are so powerful and influential in terms of your state of consciousness that they send vastly more information through the vagus network to the brain in your head than the brain in your head sends to your heart and your gut. So the estimate is that 80% of the nerve signals travel upwards from the gut brain and the heart brain to the brain in our heads, versus what's going top down from the brain in our heads down into our heart and our gut brain. So being focused on the brain in our head is really turning it upside down. We should recognize the vital importance of the consciousness centers in the lower dantian, in the middle dantian, and how they relate to the brain in our heads and the upper dantian, and how they communicate through this neural network of the vagus nerve. So that, and you can actually feel this in your body. And that's what Stephen and I teach in subtle energy meditation, is to activate this awareness of the lower dantian and the middle dantian, the upper dantian, and this connectedness, this flow of energy between the flow of electrical signals, the flow of consciousness between these energy centers, and also the connection of ourselves as an energetic network with the energetic network around us. And so, Stephen, I know you have some research that you want to share about the subtle energy system and the three brains and their connectedness, and how that, and then we can talk about how that can be a bridge to higher consciousness.
Kevin, thank you, and love and blessings to everybody who is listening. And very, very much, in fact, when you were speaking, it reminded me of Muse, which many of our listeners are familiar with. When Muse went to visit the Tibetan meditators on their very first visit, and they went to these monks who were not familiar with seeing a lot of Westerners, and they presented the monks with the headsets, and the monks placed the headsets on their hearts, not on their heads, on their hearts. And when the researchers said, why did you do that? They said, well, wouldn't you want to measure where all this energy is coming from? This loving kindness, compassion, joy, it all comes from the heart. So I think as a really straight pointer, that is a really great way to view this, that if you sense into where, as you're listening, where do you feel these different emotions? You don't feel everything in your head. If you fall in love with somebody, there's a whole reaction that happens in the heart. And, you know, when you get a gut feeling about moving in a particular way, or approaching some particular goal or project, we talk about that from the gut. So we actually talk about these feelings, you know, being stuck in our heads, feeling this open-heartedness towards life and having gut instincts. We actually speak quite naturally about them, which points straight to what we're speaking about the importance of all three energy systems, or all three brains, if we can call them that, a gut brain, a heart brain, and a head brain, in pointing us towards consciousness and boundless awareness, that there is that subtle energy and a knowing of these different energy systems actually allows us much more easily to create a bridge between the physical body, which we're not, because you know that when the physical body is in a good state, you can be aware of, right now, you can be aware of your toes, but we know we're not our toes, yet you can be aware of them. You can be aware of the energy in your toes and in your feet. And so the same way you can be aware of your thoughts. You know, we're not your thought. You can be aware of a thought. So there's something just in the very simple, basic understanding of bringing awareness to body sensations and bringing awareness to thoughts that helps us to recognize in a simple way, we're not our body, we're not our mind, therefore, who am I? So I'm going to refer to the research in terms of these different both these different brains and different energy systems of Hiroshi Motoyama and Masaru Emoto, and also the research of John Hagelin. Now, all three of them approach their research in the human body from different angles. So, and they all speak about the kind of importance of not treating the body as just the brain, and also the way that we affect our whole system, both inside us and all around us. Now, Hiroshi, I was fortunate enough some years ago to work with Masaru Emoto, whom some of you will know as the water molecule man. So I'll talk about him in just a moment. And Masaru was the one who introduced me to the work of Hiroshi Motoyama. So my function in those days with Masaru was to help him reach out to schools in Japan through science. So it was a really lovely position to be in, because I met a lot of people and I was part of a lot of the research that was being done. And when Masaru introduced me to the work of Hiroshi Motoyama, Hiroshi did a unique exploration of pioneering experiments in especially in these days and in those days, which looked very clearly at the electrophysiological evidence of the existence of a network of chakras or energy systems in the body. So not just the brain chakra or energy system, but, you know, crown, throat, heart, navel, sacral, root, that there are these energy systems in our body called chakras, and also nadis or channels of energy that, if many of you are familiar with Chinese medicine, for example, will know about a system of meridians or energy channels or flows of energy in the body. And we can have simple evidence of that. If you pinch your finger right now, the tip of your finger, you might actually feel a reaction to that in different parts of the body. You'll feel a point or a vibration right in the tip of your finger, but equally you might feel it up your arm or in your elbow. So we know that this nervous system is interconnected, that it's not an isolated function, and that when you pinch your finger, it just doesn't stay there, that you get all kinds of reactions in your body depending on the interrelationship of the network of those energy flows in your body at this current time. So you can quite often measure, you'll possibly also be aware of a pulse diagnosis, that when you go to, say, an Ayurvedic physician or a Chinese physician, they'll take your pulse and they'll tell you, oh, well, you obviously had a certain kind of food last night, or you've got some certain kind of rhythm in your life that you reacted to, all from the pulse. Just talking about the interaction of and the importance of information given not only from the brain, but also from the heart and then from your gut and so on. So Hiroshi Motoyama investigated this network of chakras and nadis, which he said formed the infrastructure of the subtle energy system that exists in both pranic forms and in the psychic dimensions, and that they potentially underlie and activate the entire system, the physical, the mental, and the spiritual body of a person. So he did experiments that successfully integrated both his own subjective ideas around the subtle energy system, and as far as possible correlated them with the objective measurements and scientific experiments. So he looked at that as kind of a blueprint for the experiments that people would wish to do based on his research, which would guide them deeper and deeper into the subtle energy system. So he looked at that work, and he looked particularly using two measuring systems. One was called an AMI, which he summarized as being an apparatus for measuring the functional conditions of meridian systems, and then relating that to the corresponding internal organs. So he used that primarily by measuring skin conductivity, so skin currents, as well as the steady state current. So he looked at shifts in voltage by using external applications of acupuncture points located alongside the finger and the toenails and different parts of the body. Now, according to acupuncture theory, these special points, which are called well points or seri points, are actually particular points that where the chi energy system actually enters or exits the body through the skin. So he focused on those, and he looked at shifts and changes in galvanic skin response or skin conductivity when people were focusing on different energy systems. So, for example, when an ordinary person focused on their heart center, he looked at shifts and change and recorded these quite in a very detailed way over quite a number of years. And then equally, he investigated yogis and people who could shift their energy perhaps more dramatically in those energy centers, and looked at changes and correlated that. And when he looked at those experiments from around about 2,000 subjects, the results of those particular experiments strongly suggested that the magnitudes and shifts and changes of skin current actually strongly were correlated with the functional changes and conditions of the chi energy system as shown in the meridians. So he published those those results. You can read them in a book of both book and published data called Theories of the Chakras. And what they really point to, based on what Kevin and I are sharing here, is that there are other energy systems in your body, not just the brain, that can be measured and that you can relate statistically, scientifically, to shifts in scientific measuring apparatus when you make a shift into focusing on particular energy systems, or shifting flow of energy in your body, which meditators of some practice after some practice can do. So that was just a little bit on Hiroshi Motoyama's research. Now on to international lecturer and researcher Dr. Masaru Emoto. So as I mentioned, I studied and did work with him for a period of time prior to him passing. So he looked particularly at how energy affects water. So he demonstrated that consciousness has the ability to change the crystalline structure of water. So here, if we kind of naturally bring a bridge from Hiroshi's work into Masaru's work, Hiroshi was saying by consciousness itself, by bringing consciousness into different energy centers, it will change the way that the flow of energy works through the body. So it's not just the brain. You are also, by bringing focus and concentration into different energy centers or chakras, you will create a shift in the system of the body. And he did that through various measurements, looking at GSR, galvanic skin response. Here, Emoto looked particularly at how consciousness affected not just the body, but how it affected bodies of water and the crystalline structure of water. So his research demonstrated that water would improve or deteriorate based simply on the information that it takes in. So this information could be via words we use. So if you consider it, when we speak quite harshly to, say, our partner or our kids, you can see the reaction on their faces. You can see that words have an effect, and we know that. Similarly, he did this with music. He did it with thoughts, and also was looking at dreams. And there's a number of people I know who are working at this moment. There's a researcher in New Zealand. She's working with the effect of her dreams on water molecules. So what he found was that either beautiful crystals or really quite, he used the word hideous crystals, would actually emerge depending on the positive or negative intention of the directed energy. Now, when we consider that the human body is made up of approximately 70% water, 80% roughly at birth, and 96% at conception, then he recognized that human beings were also affected by this information. So, in other words, if we're made up of water, not only are we affecting the brain, which is what Kevin and I are saying is not the only story, and not only are we affecting the chakras or energy centers, which Hiroshi Motoyama is saying is also not the only story, but equally we can affect the body content of our body. So our health and well-being is affected by our words and thoughts and the music that we pump into our bodies and so on. And that equally, that bodies of water around us will have some kind of resulting effect. And he did a experiment, a water blessing experiment in 2008, which was really widely reported as well as recorded. And in that, he conducted a ceremony for the blessing of water in an area of Siberia and a lake that was known as Lake Baikal. And they measured both time and signal amplitude, which characterizes, in this case, the power of a signal of water based on what was happening in the ceremony. So they recorded different shifts and changes in the amplitude of signals from the water based on what was happening in the blessing ceremonies. And what they discovered from this graph and this quite extensive statistical reporting was that when significant moments in the ceremony happened, such as a whole group of people connecting to a water blessing, that at those moments, they were immediately correlated with peaks in the signal in the area, the body of water of the lake that the people were blessing. And they noticed that also when people stopped concentrating, that, and in other words, there was a gradual loss of their intense concentration, that equally there was a signal fall in the body of water, and there was also a fall in the concentration of the people that were doing the experiment. So this again was reported. It was reported in a journal on which was looking at shifts and changes of human emotions and how that might have an effect on the environment. So from that, if we again have this hypothesis that it's not just the brain, that in fact the whole body has an effect, and that it can also affect our environment around us and vice versa, that then I'm going to bring the study of John Hagelin. So John Hagelin looked at along with 4,000 other transcendental meditators. He looked in 1993, so there were 4,000 participants in a transcendental meditation experience, which many of you listening may know of this experiment, where they looked over a period of time at the hypothesis that levels of violent crime in the District of Columbia would fall substantially during a particular large-scale meditation event. Now, so you can, using the bridge from Masaru's experiment, where large groups of meditators were found to have an effect on water and on a body of water. Here, they're looking at large-scale bodies of meditators having an effect on other human beings and other human beings' behavior, in this case, levels of violent crime. So they looked at basically, would a group which has increasing coherence and reducing stress, would it have an effect on the collective consciousness of the district? And what they showed when they, so it was done over a period of days, and what they showed was that the actual crimes dropped significantly during that particular meditation project, and that when they compared this to exactly the same time period in 5 previous years, they determined that the effect of the coherence creating group on reducing violent crimes could not be accounted for by any other reason other than the fact that they were sitting at that particular time. So it showed that the effect of the group size actually assisted this shift in violent crimes. And when they looked at the effect that a permanent group might have, so were you to have 4,000 coherence creating experts in the district permanently, they calculated that long-term effect could be reducing violent crimes by around 50%. So that's an often quoted piece of research. It's a beautiful example of how not just our brain, but our entire body, and then just not our entire body, but our collective body of human consciousness might, through this opening to compassion, to meditation, to calmness, to peace, all the things that we point out in our book, Kevin, might actually point to the fact that as a human race, by collectively bringing our whole bodies in awareness to different human problems, that we might be able to solve them collectively by dropping into deep, boundless awareness and allowing what arises to actually radiate from our being. And not often what arises is equanimity or joy or loving kindness or peace. So all those traditional, metta, upekkha, all those traditional collective qualities that can arise actually can have a cumulative effect and can affect to the better many of these challenges that we face as humanity. So I think that's a lovely point to lead back. I love those pieces of research because they speak to, once again, Hiroshi, the power of the whole human body, Masaru, the power of the whole human body and the effect that collectives can have on nature, and then John Hagelin's research that our collective effect of the whole human being in harmony can have a direct effect on us as a collective.
Beautiful. I love that research. And it really hopefully opens our minds to step beyond these assumptions that we have culturally, that we are our mind and our body, that consciousness arises from brain activity, and that it's all about what's happening in our brains, to open us to feeling the different nervous systems in our body, the cardiac nervous system, the enteric nervous system, the integration of those in a whole energy field, which then is connected to the field around us. And what we're doing in here through meditation, through sensing ourselves as an integrated energy system and bringing this mind, body, heart energy system into coherence and synchrony and states of peace and joy and compassion, that not only has an effect on our own health, our own well-being, the way that we perceive the world and our possibilities in the world, but also it just has an effect in our relationships and how we view each other and how we view our connectedness with all of life. And so I don't think we sufficiently realize how caught up we are in these assumptions and in this kind of thinking-oriented, brain-centered outlook, how that affects how we view ourselves, our relationships with each other, our relationship with the planet, and our essential being as this vast, boundless consciousness. So hopefully that research and those ideas just kind of percolate in all of your minds and also stimulate and inspire practice in terms of awakening your inner sensory awareness to yourself as an energy system, and how that has the effect not only of having you rest in a state of natural well-being, but naturally relate to others in the same way and really feel. And that's, I think, the final maybe note to end on is that when we're stuck in our heads, we're not sensing, feeling presence, vitality, energy, connectedness, heart-centered connectedness. We are really stuck in looping concepts, and we are disconnected from ourselves, from each other, from the planet, and from the essence of who we are. So as we open up and let go of those preconceptions that we don't even know are blocking us, activate, tune into this inner sensory awareness, and see how that naturally just opens us to a natural state of peace and well-being and compassionate relationships, and transforms our life here on this planet and beyond. So thank you, Stephen, for this discussion, for sharing that research. And thank you all for listening to us. And again, I hope it inspires your practice. And if you'd like more information on meditation and awareness practices, especially subtle energy meditation like we're pointing to, you can visit us at raisingourvibration.net. And there you can learn about the Raising Our Vibration book, the ROV meditation app, and the different courses that we have to guide you into this deeper awareness of who we are and how we're all connected. So thank you again for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you again next time. Love and blessings, and bye for now.